to Recruitment Working Lunch. I'm delighted to have as a guest Cynthia Lewis today, and she's going to talk about her business and her background, and a bit about our topic for the year, which is diversity and inclusion. But I'm obliged contractually, apparently, to ask what everyone's had for lunch. So in preparation for this, because I was a bit nervous, I only had an apple. So and it wasn't a great apple. So in solidarity with Debbie Easterday in the States, I had an apple, but I bet hers are better than mine. We've got a beef, horseradish and rocket sandwich. That's very nice. Very nice. Louise has had hers, but she's not saying what it is. So it's probably sausage, egg and chips, if I know Louise. Oh no, cottage cheese on crackers. Sorry about that.
Very nice, very posh.
Yeah, and Shafiq's going to come in something really exotic because he's the cook. We're going to have to get him to do a cooking demo at some stage. But let's start. So, Cynthia, tell us about yourself, your background, your journey, how you got to be here, and a bit about your business and what you do now.
Yeah, well, pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me to take part. So I've been in recruitment now for just over 20 years, and I started my career long time ago. I think when recruitment was maybe not as maybe diverse as it is now, and I also grew up in Leeds, so I remember telling you the story about this, Graham. So yeah. my first ever recruitment job was with a search firm, and they had about 120 consultants in the company. And I remember turning up on my first day and really excited. Oh, I'm going to be in recruitment. This is amazing. Walked into this office, and of the 120 people, there were only 5 women, and I was the only person of color. So I was like, okay, this is an interesting start, and I think that really started shaping my journey into recruitment, where I think with a lot of the companies I worked for very early in those days, I was pretty much in the minority. I was either the only person of color or the only female, and I think the industry has started to change a lot more, and there's a lot more diversity in the industry, which is brilliant. And I think a lot more people are seeing it as a career of choice. But I think throughout my career, some of the challenges and barriers that I had around accessing opportunities in the same way, around progression and promotion, I had a lot of barriers and challenges. And a lot of the times I questioned, because of the environments that I was in, is it because of the skills that I'm not qualified enough, or is it other things that are holding me back? Is it my gender? Is it my ethnicity? All those things played a really, really big part in shaping my career, but also shaping the person that I've now become. And as the years kind of progressed on, I ended up, for me to move up in the organizations I was working in, I had to kind of move out because of, again, like I said, there was a lot of kind of barriers and challenges. Yeah. And you've got to remember, I think back in those days, recruitment was very much a very kind of tough sales kind of environment. You either had to be cutting in or you couldn't do it. And I class myself as a very tough individual, but again, it was also very much a boys' club. I remember the language and the jokes that were said, and the banter.
Yeah. I hate that word, banter. I hate that word. It's like an all-encompassing excuse. I hate it. It's a horrible word.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really didn't allow for a lot of women to maybe be their true authentic selves, because you felt you had to be either joining in, and if you didn't join into some of that, you were sometimes excluded. So I think it was that kind of battle with wanting to fit in, wanting to be part of the team, but then also knowing that you didn't accept some of the things that were going on. So I think this really started forming this in my mind around some of the challenges and barriers that are around in organizations, around the culture that's there. Is it one that allows people to succeed and to thrive? If it's not one that's inclusive and allows people to be their true authentic selves. But I kind of progressed on, and I think after years of working in organizations where I was very much in the minority, I started challenging, well, why is that? Why am I not seeing that representation coming through? And for me, it dawned on me that it's not the fact that the talent wasn't out there. It's not equal access to opportunities, and the way that we connect and engage with different communities isn't always the same. So that led me to want to do something about it. And I'm such a great believer that if you want to see change in this world, then you've got to be part of that change, and you've got to come up with a solution. So I decided to set up my own recruitment business just over 6 years ago. purely with the with the mission to try and connect and engage organizations that were genuine about reaching a much more diverse talent pool, which was not in a tokenistic way or ticking boxes, but could really work to create the right kind of environment so those people could come in, they could retain that talent, but also progress them as well. And that's where the business started, just as I said, over 6 years ago, with that mission and purpose to really try and start to bring about that equality and start leveling the playing field when we talk about attraction and recruitment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, as you say, it's almost 20 years you've been in the industry now. And as I mentioned to you when we spoke pre-interview, I know that company very well because after you, my son went to work there. A good friend of mine who I've actually interviewed on this show, Lisa Jones, worked there as well. And I tried to buy it for TMP, or what is now Hudson. I think before you were there, and it was, I can remember it well. It wasn't to our taste, their way of doing business, or the people there. So I admire you enormously for sticking it out. And I think it's fair to say that your experiences that you've had there and subsequently, they directly led to you setting up your own business. I mean, that was one of the big drivers, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I think for me, it was just the sheer frustration of not seeing change happen fast enough. And I think, I knew there was a better way of moving the needle forward. And I think, if we think of, pre-COVID or pre anything that happened in the events of the summer around diversity and inclusion and equality, I think loads of people, when you talked about diversity, was very much just on agenda. Everyone just thought the minute you mentioned diversity, it's like, oh, women, yeah, okay, we're focusing on women, and that all the other protected characteristics were never really at the forefront of some of those kind of strategies, whether that's ethnicity or LGBTQ plus or disability. I think everyone just really focused on trying to tackle gender. And I suppose, when you are trying to change processes, it's sometimes for others, they feel it's easier to focus at one thing at a time. So I think gender, because there was a big push, the government had set all these targets on driving more inclusion, especially from a gender perspective. It was easier for a lot of organizations to put their focus on how do we kind of engage and attract more women. And there was this whole kind of 50-50 around balanced boards, around balanced kind of leadership teams. So I think the focus, everyone put all their eggs in one basket at one point and just focused on gender, that they forgot the other kind of protected characteristics. And I think for me, that was where the frustration was, to say, well, it's not a, pick one that you want to focus on. It should be everything that you do is around creating an inclusive culture, which means everybody. It's about how can you make sure you're not leaving anyone behind, but the processes that you're putting in place will make sure that, whether that's from an ethnicity point of view, gender, LGBTQ plus, disability, everyone has the same outcome and everyone is treated the same, but also you're making a conscious effort to be connecting and engaging with some of those underrepresented groups and communities as well. So that's what I really kind of wanted to try and do and push forward, to say, look, there is a better way to be doing this. You shouldn't just only be focusing on one particular area.
Yeah, conscious effort to engage. That's what one of the things I picked up from that, and that's something certainly we're trying to do with Working Lunch. But I think that is one of the keys to it, isn't it? That there is a conscious effort to engage. But let me go to one of the key questions for me. What's changed in the last 20 years? What's changed? What's got better? What's got worse, and so on, with regard to D&I particularly?
Yeah, I think what's changed is D&I is no longer seen as a nice to have. It's now seen as a business critical, and I think that's where it's moved the needle forward. I think people in the past just thought, oh, well, it's a nice thing to try and get that inclusion, but we'll get to it at some point, whereas now it is business critical. This has to be the top of any business agenda. And I think where we've seen now is more accountability. People want to see that this isn't just something that people say, well, we are trying to be more inclusive around our approach. They actually want to see evidence. So now it's become more evidence-based, whether that's through people having to now divulge their data around, whether that's from a gender pay gap, around the ethnicity kind of targets, around, the makeup of the people in the organizations, we now have to be accountable to actually start to divulge that information. And I think that accountability has led to more people taking this a lot more seriously than maybe they did before. And I think for me, that's been the shift. But I think the fact that now people are very vocal and open about not accepting mediocre kind of processes, they are calling it out. Social media has played a big part on that. I mean, you just have to watch the news, and organizations that are still doing things the old kind of way are getting the spotlight shown on them in the wrong kind of light at the moment. So people are now holding those organizations to account, and they want to see that change. They're demanding that change. And I think people have found their voice now where they won't accept anything that is, mediocre.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And you've had experience both inside recruitment as a recruiter in recruitment companies running your own recruitment business, but you've also been an in-house recruiter as well. You've worked inside big corporates. What are there differences between the two?
Yeah, so I suppose when you're working in-house, it's a little bit, I suppose there's a lot more reliant on agencies and having a, PSL that can support you on some of those initiatives. And I think this is where I think for organizations, they try and almost move the problem to the recruiters, go fix it. Well, I just need to see. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I need to see more diverse candidates, go and find me the candidates. And I think as recruiters, because, there's that thing, you're trying to make a placement, you're trying to please the client, and sometimes it's very much about who's going to get there first. There's that kind of race of making placement that it's not always done in the right kind of way. So I see the challenges from an internal perspective where there's a lot of goodwill and intention to get to the solution and try and make that kind of impact. But I think sometimes it's about organizations too quick to shift the problem to the recruiters to go fix. Whereas I think it's about accountability for both the recruiters and the organizations to both be on that journey of what do we need to be doing, how do we all drive that kind of change. And I think as a recruiter, it's sometimes difficult when you've got the challenges of you've got your targets and stuff that you're trying to hit, and you're up against the clock. You've got to make a placement, you've got to make that kind of quick that hire, that you don't have the time to be able to put in to really do a proper search, to scour the market and widen that kind of search, because again there isn't that kind of time. So it's all about the processes, and I think for me this is where it's about changing the way that you work and the way that you run those processes. So it's not being reactive when organizations are coming through. It's about how can you proactively be engaging and connecting with different kind of communities. So when you do have those opportunities, you already know where you can take those opportunities to candidates that are more likely to come from different kind of backgrounds, as opposed to maybe your immediate database or people that you've got immediate access to. So it's about building those pipelines. So it's no longer just a kind of quick reaction. You already have that engagement in those communities that sometimes are underrepresented. Yeah.
So in terms of one of the questions I wanted to ask you was whether or not recruiters or hiring managers actually are part of the problem or part of the solution. I think from what you're saying, they're very much part of the solution. I mean, they're obviously going to be the problem initially, but they are part of the solution in terms of they have to take responsibility.
Yeah, and I think all of us are part of the problem in some way, because I think as recruiters, we're too quick to want to please, and therefore sometimes we spoon feed hiring managers what we know they've always had and we know they will accept. So there's that easy solution of, well, I know they like candidates that have come from this background, I've worked in these organizations. Guess what? I know a guy that is brilliant. I'll just put that person across. So, and again, the hiring managers, because there's a pressure on them to fill those roles, will just accept that. So I think until all of us are challenging ourselves to want to do better and say, no, actually, Mr. Hiring Manager, I need a bit more time because I want to scour the market to make sure I'm reaching as many kind of candidates as possible to give you a diverse shortlist, which means, unfortunately, it might take me a little bit longer to connect and engage with people from different kind of backgrounds to give you that shortlist. But it's also about how we measure what good looks like as well. I think sometimes is the issue, because I think people have a certain perception of, well, if I can only have in my team, I've always recruited people that have come from this particular background, therefore that's what I know is good. But if somebody presented me with something that's maybe a little bit different, or a candidate that's maybe not worked in those kind of environments, are they viewed in the same kind of way? Is maybe somebody that ticks all those kind of boxes? Probably not. So again, it's about changing our mindset in terms of what we think good looks like and how we measure and evaluate candidates as we're presented to them. And it's being, again, just being a little bit more open-minded around that attraction piece and how you assess talent.
It is a difficult one. I used to recruit back in the 80s for a guy called Jimmy Gulliver, who was a very successful entrepreneur. Everyone calls him Sir James Gulliver, but he was never actually knighted. he owned a business called Argyle, which owned Safeway, the supermarket, as it was then, amongst a number of things. And I used to recruit his personal PAs, and they were professional PAs. They were newly qualified chartered accountants. And there was a particular type, and it was the type that the guy that had first done the job, who still worked for him, who was group development director, and they'd done various personality profiles. And basically you would get a personality profile of somebody and you try and match exactly. Yeah. And I can remember the arguments I used to have with him and his team in their boardroom, trying to convince him to look outside that, that to go somewhere different. And in fact, I did have a small amount of success in that I think it was the religion of the person wasn't taken into account for a change. And he recruited somebody a little bit outside the norm, who went on to be extremely successful for him. In fact, I think he ended up running part of it. But at the time, I can remember the pain I felt trying to recruit to a particular type. As a recruiter, I always wanted to step outside. I always wanted to get somebody different. When I was told in the days when you could discriminate on grounds of age, I was told by a recruitment company, actually, strange enough, they needed an FD that was under 40. And I was at pains to find somebody who was over 40, who, it's not a apocryphal story, did get the job because he was the best candidate. But it is a battle. It is a battle. And as you say, recruiters will often fold, as indeed will hiring managers. I'm not putting words in your mouth. This is a genuine question. Do you think positive discrimination then is a good thing with regard to the aspects of recruitment we're talking about?
I think any form of discrimination is not good. So for me, I think it's a differentiator between positive action and positive discrimination, and the two are very different. And I think people view positive discrimination as a good thing. It's still discrimination, so for me, positive action is what you should be focusing on. What are the things that you need to do to positively connect with underrepresented groups to encourage them to come forward? So any form of discrimination for me is a no, positive or otherwise. So it's all about positive action for me.
That's a great answer, and I'm going to use that in the future. Thank you for that. I will credit you. I promise you. I will credit you.
I'll be checking.
One of the within the diversity and inclusion theme that we've talked about and working lunch this year, and will continue to do so. One of the things we've talked about a little bit about is about technology, and I was just wondering how you felt technology could help in terms of whether it's upcoming things like AI or stuff we already have. That we use within our CRMs and what have you. How can technology help in your view?
Yeah, I think technology is always a great enabler if it's done in the right kind of way. And I think with AI, we've seen some of or heard some of the stories when it's actually not gone right. So I think for me, I think there's some amazing systems out there like Be Applied, which really help in terms of making sure that it's removing some of that bias out of that process. But as much as technology can play a part, if that person eventually comes through the door and they're still biased with the person that's interviewing them, all you've done is pretty much delayed the inevitable. So for me, it's looking at the full cycle of that process. It's like, if you've got technology, that's great, because that will help remove some of the bias at the early stages, whether that's from an attraction point of view or sifting kind of candidates. But eventually that person will walk through the door. They will have a face-to-face interview. Who is the person that's interviewing them? What is their bias? Is it somebody that's going to be recruiting in a fair kind of way? Because it doesn't matter what the system pushes out. It's that interaction between the one-on-one kind of interviewer and interviewer. So I think for me, that's where the issue is. And I think technology is great. And I think a lot of organizations have started looking at a kind of CRM systems that enable that to happen. I think there are others out there that kind of almost remove things like the gender or the names, or, you know, to make it much more of a fairer kind of process. And I think that's great, because what that does, it allows us to widen the gates a bit to get more people through. But eventually, like I say, you have to tackle it in its entirety and not just part of that process. So yes, that's the early stages of that process, but you've got to look at the late stages of what happens when those people are then brought in for interview. Again, what happens in terms of how you evaluate those candidates, what happens in terms of how you view what good looks like, you know, when you're sat in front of those candidates. So all those things are part of the process. And I think that's where organizations are now starting to look at things like training to make sure that goes hand in hand with some of the stuff that the systems are doing, to make sure that they're tackling it at the pre-screening stages, but they're also tackling it at that education piece of training everyone to have that kind of diversity lens when they are assessing candidates, and try and remove some of that bias. So at least the output at the other end is more positive, because again, you know, unless you do that, yes, you will have this volume of people coming through, but they'll start to fall through if you've not removed that bias out of the stages of the process.
Yeah, because if the bias is already there, then it's not a question of discrimination. It's just that they're not going to get selected.
Yeah,
yeah. There was a guest. I think it was on Working Lunch. I'm pretty sure it was last week. Something I was listening to last week, and it was about CRMs and the fact that a lot of them have this facility to be able to effectively make the candidates blind, or sorry, the name without the names, anonymous. And there is a term for it, which I'm sure somebody's going to put in the chat in a second, because I can't remember what it is. But that very few recruiters actually ask for it.
Yeah.
They don't require it, even though most of the CRMs can do it. Is that something you think will change, that people will to do away with this bias that they didn't realize they had? Do you think that they will say, well, actually, we're going to use this CRM where it will make all the candidates look exactly the same as far as their names are concerned, or ages for that matter? Because that's another one, of course, you can't discriminate on. Do you think that will change things?
I think it's a good start, but as I said, you know, that's just the start. It has to go hand in hand with something else. That's not the silver bullet here. That's not going to fix everything. So I think that's a good start in terms of getting more people coming through the door. But again, for me, it's looking at all those stages. What happens once you've got those candidates and the system's screened and said, right, here's the 10 CVs that we recommend are good, even though you don't know the names, you don't have the gender. Somebody's eventually going to have to say, right, I'm going to interview these people and meet them. So for me, and I think this is where I think it's an education for us as recruiters, what tools are we being given as recruiters by our organizations around how do we tackle some of that bias that all of us have? And I would question anybody that puts their hands up and say, I don't have a bias, because we all have a bias, whether that's affinity bias or confirmation bias or whatever it is. Yeah. We all have different forms of bias, but it's understanding how that bias plays out in a recruitment process and the impact that it has in terms of the output. So for me, that's where I'd be tackling that issue, to say, right, what training or support are we giving the recruiters to say, right, the systems are doing their parts, they anonymizing everything, they're basing it on skills and people that are eligible for the role. But what's happening when that's formally with a human being and they're assessing that CV? Have you actually removed that bias? Because you've done it with the CRM systems, but have you done it with the human being that's then moving it to the next stage? So I think that's where that education piece is still lacking within the recruitment industry. I don't think there's a lot of people that have given their recruiters the tools to understand what it means around running a fair and inclusive recruitment process. I do a lot of training with recruitment companies at the moment, and I'll be amazed at when I run a session with recruiters and I start talking about this. A lot of them have no idea what protected characteristics is, and therefore we're still putting that focus on recruiters to be doing this in an inclusive way, yet they don't understand the basics of what we're actually trying to achieve. We're actually setting the recruiters up to fail because we're not doing our job by equipping them with the right kind of tools to be able to do that job properly. And tools, I don't mean as in systems, I mean as in that education to understand what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's where we are at fault as organizations, by not giving them that kind of support.
The recruiters and the hiring managers. I mean, just on the CRM point, Louisa's reminded me it was none of the CRMs that she's reviewed this year proper anonymization. That's the word, anonymization. But the ATSs tend to. And Erica, I think, was doing an interview last week, so was saying not one agency recruiter has ever asked her for it. And that is something that is obviously a concern. She's now live. That is right. They don't see it as a way to save time or make money. So sadly, it's not on their agenda at all.
Yeah.
But that's the key thing, isn't it? As far as business accepting it, recruitment business included, and clients accepting it. This is a way to have a better business.
Yeah.
A more inclusive business is a more diverse business is a better business. That is a key thing. Debbie's asked a question, so I'll only get in trouble with her if I don't ask her. Because it's never just about bringing diverse candidates to the table. What conversations are you having with your hiring managers to help them see the value of diversity? So you talked about training recruiters. What are you saying to the hiring managers?
So for me, a lot of the work that we do is not just training recruiters, it's also training hiring managers, because ultimately they're the ones that make the final decisions. So for me, it's that education piece. As you rightly said, Graham, at the beginning, when you gave that example of, you had to try and find a candidate that fitted this criteria that they had. It's about getting them to think differently in terms of what good looks like. So they're not always focused on this outcome of a perfect candidate that's got to have this long shopping list of requirements. They have to start thinking outside the box as well, and know the part that they play in terms of bringing about that change. So there's an education piece that has to go both ways, to the recruiters and also to the hiring managers. If we only train the recruiters, the hiring managers will still have the final say in terms of who's appointed and who's hired. If they don't understand and haven't bought into it, all this is for nothing, right? So both parties equally have to be coming at this at the same kind of level, both with the same kind of understanding that they're trying to do things differently. Therefore, the way that they assess candidates also has to be different, and how you evaluate what good looks like also has to be different. If you've always preferred candidates that have had a 2-1 from Oxbridge, have worked in a top 4, one of the big 4 only. What about somebody that had worked in one of the big 6, let's say? Does that mean that person's not good enough? So I think for me, that's where that education piece also has to come. And I think if we're equipping the recruiters with the right kind of tools and confidence to be able to challenge sometimes the hiring managers, that will also start to help. Because I think at the moment there's still this fear that the recruiters don't feel confident or confident enough to be able to challenge the hiring managers, and therefore it's easy for them to back off and say, no worries, I'll just go and get you a different kind of candidate, and again put in what they're used to, because they'll know that that's what they'll accept. So the education piece has to be both ways for that to really work.
Agreed. I think if we have recruiters working for, I don't run recruitment companies any longer. I sit as a non-exec on the board of a few, but if recruiters aren't able to challenge the hiring managers, aren't able to challenge it in the way that you do, I'm sure that I used to, then they're not going to be able to progress. No. Whatever they do, they're not going to be able to progress. I used to have a training course, as it were, for client interviewers. I used to talk about the difference between professional and non-professional interviewers. In those days, we interviewed all our candidates, so we were interviewing all day, every day, and we became very good at it, and we trained people to be really, really good at it. And we'd start by, everyone makes their mind up in the first few moments, but the rest of the time, so I've decided you're an amazing candidate. Now I'm going to find out where your flaws are, where are the things that go wrong, that might go wrong with the client. And I used to teach clients to do that as well. You make your mind up in the first few minutes. Everybody does, it's human nature. But don't spend the rest of the time reinforcing that prejudice, whatever it might be. Spend the time knocking it down. I really don't like this person very much, but there must be some good points. There must be some aspects of this person that are positive, and training people to do that was really difficult. It sounds like we still have to do that with our recruiters. Our recruitment consultants have to be trained in that.
Because otherwise we're not equipping them the right kind of support. And I think sometimes when recruiters come into organization, they're given the usual kind of training, which is around BD, which is around sales, and but very few companies give them that kind of training around D&I. Very few. So we're still expecting them to deliver on that. That's still an expectation, but we're not equipping them with the right kind of tools to be able to do that. So we're great at, rolling out all this amazing training as part of the induction that covers all these different techniques and skills, but nobody touches D&I. And yet that is now a fundamental piece of a recruiter's role if they are to make that difference. And if, as things are now going, every organization and client wants to know what are recruiters doing around driving diversity and inclusion. It's now become a top of an agenda for any recruiter to get a project, from their clients. Now they want to know, what are you going to do to diversify, because it's on their radar now, and therefore it's also on the recruiter's radar. But we're not equipping them with the right kind of tools, so we're not supporting our recruiters at all.
We have to get it away from being a box ticking exercise to being, yes, we train our people to do these things.
Yes.
One of the companies I work with, I do all their GDPR and their anti-slavery and bribery and corruption training. All the I hasten to add, bribery and corruption training. I don't train them in corruption. And the idea being that they understand those basic things. But that's not a recruitment company. It happens. But if that were a recruitment company, then I'd add into that you need to understand these things as well. And it's not just because it will make you a better recruiter, but it's also because it's necessary. It's the right thing to do. Making you a better recruiter will help make everything better for everybody. Stephen asked whether or not he thought recruiters were relying on technology to handle, as it were, the diversity issue. I don't think they are, from the sounds of it, because the technology isn't there or isn't being used in that. I think you're right. It's a more fundamental human problem, and it comes down to training. It comes down to making sure they understand what it is they're doing.
It's that awareness piece, and I think that education, I think, is fundamentally what it comes down to. And I think the systems will only be as good as how they're used. So I think the ATS systems are now getting better at things like that. I think there's more that you can do with the CRM systems and the ATS systems. But again, ultimately, that's just one part of it. You can't just say, well, because we've invested in a specific ATS system that's going to allow us to anonymize the CVs, we've done our bit. It has to go further than that. And I think this is where that complexity is coming in, that people are saying, of course, we've invested thousands and got a system that does all this for us, therefore we're done, we've ticked that box. And it's like, well, no, that's just the beginning. You actually have to go a few steps further than that to actually have a real impact, and for you to see the results of what that system is actually doing, because ultimately it doesn't run the whole process from beginning to end. It only does one part of it, which is that assessment piece. And it is a tool.
And the tool it depends on who uses the tool and how well they use it as to how effective it is. The tool in and of itself is mindless. It doesn't help. You touched on an interesting concept there, which I want to move on to, in terms of where are we going? What's the ideal as far as you're concerned, or what should be the ideal as far as the recruitment industry is concerned? Where should we be?
I think for us we have to evolve as a sector, and I think this is something that for me is still a little bit of frustration, because I think we're still reliant on the old ways of doing things that right now aren't fit for purpose. We have to look at the climate that we're in. We have to look at what the challenges are that we're trying to resolve. And if we're still using the same old processes that we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they're not fit for purpose. So we're actually doing a disservice. As recruiters, we have to be part of the solution. I still feel at the moment we're probably a little bit part of the problem, because again, like as I said, to the fact that we're not up to scratch ourselves to be able to be advising our hiring managers. Therefore, until we are ourselves fully equipped to be doing that, we need to get our own house in order first before we can fix anybody else's. And I think that's where it comes back to, how do we train our recruiters give them the right kind of tools to go out there and do a great job in training and supporting the clients and the hiring managers that they're working with. Until we do that, and move towards that kind of model of understanding the challenges ourselves, we are, literally just putting a sticky plaster over it and not really fixing the problem. I also think, for recruiters, we have to understand that diversity comes in so many different formats. I think at the moment, because of everything that's happened with BLM, there's been a big push to try and get more candidates from an ethnic minority kind of background. I have to say, literally, I've never been more inundated by recruiters contacting me for recruitment jobs. All they put in LinkedIn is a search for recruitment and DNI, and a black face comes up, and then I get inundated at the amount of jobs I've been offered as a recruitment coordinator, as a recruitment consultant. I run my own business. I've been a CEO for years, and yet they don't see that. They're just so quick to spam and send out, this communication. So this is where that education piece is so important, because it's becoming so tokenistic that we're actually not fixing the problem.
Tokenistic. That's exactly what it's becoming. Box ticking.
Exactly.
It's the process needs to be much broader than that. It's not so much about active discrimination. It's about, don't think of it as a box ticking exercise. Think of it as making you a better recruiter, never mind a better person. Think about helping everybody. It's an interesting one. I mean, the whole recruitment community is driven by profit. The vast majority of it is, and there needs to be, I think, in my view, a move towards the clients are driving this. So why aren't the recruiters following? I remember talking to clients. I was with a client of mine, big IT recruitment company, international IT recruitment company up in the Northwest. And I remember being in their boardroom, and the main recruiter for one of the really, really big IT companies came in and talked to us. And he said, the only thing the CEO is worried about in the future, and this is probably 6-7 years ago, the only thing he's interested in is diversity and inclusion. So what are you going to do about it? And that is a very good company, and I'm sure they have policies in place, but most recruiters don't. I've just had a question, a few CEOs of recruitment firms, this is Rob, about the launch. I love the concept. Sorry, I'm not I see. They being able to focus on DNI is seen as nice to have capability, but not at the cost of slowing down the process. Rec firms will only engage if they see the power of the pounds as well. My point exactly.
Yeah, it comes down to commerciality, and I think this is the challenge within our industry. And I think until it starts hitting our pockets, it won't be seen as a priority. But I think more and more, because it's becoming a priority for our clients, we're to the point now, it's that with a lot of the bigger firms, the bonuses and the way that the execs are now awarded their bonuses is actually linked to diversity and inclusion. So it's now becoming a priority for them.
Talking about
which means then it's also going to start affecting the recruiters, because they'll be saying, unless you're helping us to achieve our D&I kind of targets and strategy, we won't work with you. That's where it's going to start hitting and impacting the recruiters. So again, it's about also being a little bit of a step forward and not waiting for that day to happen. Start looking at your processes now. Start, educating your staff. Start getting a little bit ahead and being more kind of proactive as opposed to being reactive when it starts dawning that you're not getting the business, because nobody wants to work with you because you're not giving them that diversity or that, the access to diverse talent. So this is where I think we're heading towards. I think more and more organizations are going to start demanding accountability on what recruiters are actually doing to affect that change, but it has to start with us. If I look at the number of recruitment firms that are, ethnic minority owned, very little, very, very little. I still walk in rooms where I'm one of the only Black female CEOs of a recruitment business. This is 2021. There's many of us. There's nothing special about me, but why is there not many people that look like me from my kind of background? So for me, I still think there's a lot that our sector needs to do. If we're not diversifying our own teams, how can we diversify the teams of our clients if we can't do it for ourselves? So that's where we've got to start tackling that issue and think, right, what do we need to be doing to make ourselves better, to do better, to then be able to support our clients in the right kind of way? That's not tokenistic. That's not ticking the right kind of boxes. That's really about affecting change in a real and meaningful way.
Absolutely. And it will increase the bottom line. I mean, that's the key. That's the key message that recruiters have to understand, that by doing it, you will become better. You will have a much broader range of candidates to choose from. You mentioned a couple of times diversity and inclusion isn't just about race or gender. It's about other things as well. I had a conversation with my youngest granddaughter, who's 15 and doing a GCSE, right, not GCE, GCSE in engineering this year, and I was so delighted. And she said, well, that's not the reaction I get from all my friends. And I'm thinking, these are children, these are 15-year-olds. She said, well, no, when I tell them I'm doing engineering, you're what? But you're a girl. I think, oh, goodness. I said, send them my way. I'll put them on this. Let them listen to this. I'll send a recording of this.
But this is the thing, that next generation is fearless and they have a voice. This is where we're seeing that the ones coming behind us, they're very values led. They want to know, what are you doing? And they will hold you to account. And again, social media has allowed for them to really have this playground to voice their opinions. This is what we've got to be mindful of now, that there's nowhere to hide anymore. I think all these things that we used to kind of get away with back in the day, you can't do that anymore, because everything there's so much transparency now, but also accountability, and people will hold you to account. If you're going to come out and you're going to put a black square and say we're an anti-racist organization because it's during Black Lives Matter, but inside your organization there's still discrimination, there's people that are not paid, the gender pay gap is appalling. There's all these different things happening internally, but externally you're putting it out to say, hey, look at us, we don't stand for that. That's not going to wash anymore. People will hold you down for that. So whatever you're putting out, whatever you're saying, you have to also be living by those principles. Otherwise, you will be held to account for that.
You have to believe it, as you say. That trial by social media is one thing, but the reality is that the more diverse the population becomes, the more diverse the businesses will become, and recruiters are always followers. We're not massive innovators as individuals, and we tend to follow. We'll go where the money is, and if the clients want it. And having this conversation has really brought home to me conversations I was having, as I say, 5, maybe 7 years ago. And why haven't we changed more? Why haven't we changed more? It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. It's scary stuff.
It's moving slowly, and this is, I think, that the pace of, but I think, since everything that happened over the summer, I think that's really accelerated some of that change. It's now brought it to the top of the agenda, where before it was a nice thing to do. It's now an immediate action. If you're not addressing D&I at the moment, you are going to get left behind. So I think it's now become such a priority that people are no longer seeing it as something that we'll come and deal with. We have to start dealing with it now. We have to start tackling those inequalities that still exist within our society, and we have to tackle them head on. And those that are brave and bold enough are the ones that will come out the other side. Those that are still burying their heads in the sand and saying, oh no, we're still okay doing what we've always done, will get left behind.
So practical points, because we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm very conscious that's absolutely flown by. And you've done a lot more talking than me, which is a really good sign.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
No. That's a good thing. The entire audience is very happy about that as well. What are the practical things that if you're a hirer within a corporate, or you run a recruitment company, what are the practical things that people need to be doing now to help improve this situation?
I think for me, it's look at your processes, look at where there could be bias within those processes and start to eliminate that. Do an audit of your processes if you have to, because unless you understand where the problem is, you can't fix it. So therefore, that's why I will say, do that kind of almost a diversity kind of audit on your business and think, well, is this fit for purpose for what we're trying to achieve? And you will start to see where the areas are that you really need to make that adjustment, or you need to make those changes. Is it an attraction problem? Is it a retention problem? Or is it a progression problem? Because again, everything doesn't come under one umbrella because it's D&I. It's different kind of parts of that. So look at all your processes and look at where are these pain points and start to tackle that. But until you've actually done that assessment or that audit, it's hard to pinpoint, and it's not one size fits all kind of solution either, because every organization's at a different stage of that journey. So it's understanding where you are on that journey, where you're trying to get to, and the steps that you need to take to achieve that. But there's some quick wins that you could do. Education is so key, right? Educate your people around what it means to be a truly inclusive organization that's across all protected characteristics. Don't just focus on the latest trends that people are talking about, whether that's ethnicity or that's gender or whatever. Always constantly be making sure you're creating an environment that is not leaving anybody behind. And until you can do that, that's when you start to really get to grips with making sure that at any given stage, it's all an equal kind of process. And in underrepresented groups, you're putting more positive action to really connect and engage and do more work in those areas. And I think that starts to change what you then become and what you're able to offer your hiring managers as well. And again, that will have an impact on your business because they will choose you over somebody that's not even tackling that any day. So already from a commercial point of view, that's an advantage to you. Having invested a little bit up front to get it right will have dividends later on.
Very much so, very much so. There's a specific example. I interviewed Tracy Barrett, who runs Blue Sky PR, and I think it was as part of her work with APSCO. They were all encouraged to spend time with people from different backgrounds within the organization, so different religions and different ethnic minorities and so on. And just by the very fact of sitting and having a conversation, or on Zoom as it was, I think at the time, they all learned more. And it's all about that. It's all about education. I mean, the two things that make us what we are: education and communication. And if we improve both of those within our community, that will improve the wider community. Naturally enough, it's going to improve the wider community. But so let's just finish on you personally. Where are you going? What do you want to happen? Where are you going to be in, I don't know, 5 years' time? Classic interview question. There you go. I bet you haven't been asked that for a long time.
Well, I haven't actually, because no one's really ever bothered to ask me, Graham. So thank you for asking me. I think for me, I'm a campaigner at heart. For me, it's about social change, it's about social justice. I will be on this mission. For me, this isn't about ticking boxes. This isn't from a commercial point. I do this because it makes a real difference and a real impact in people's lives. So I will still be doing this. I will still be drumming that drum for equality to make sure that as a society, we start to reflect what we see when we step outside the doors, that when we walk into our organizations, that beauty and that diversity of what we see outside is reflected in the organizations that we work in. That's what I want to see. That's what I'm here for. And that's what I'm fighting for. So this is very much for me a personal agenda of wanting to get that equality right for that next generation that's coming behind, because I didn't have that, and unless we start to break that cycle somewhere, the next generation are still going to be facing the same challenges that I face, that my parents face, that generations before them face. We have to do better. So for me, all of us have a part to play in this. All of us have the accountability to be able to make that difference. So the onus is on us to be the change that we want to see. So for me, that's what I'll be doing. And I would love for others to be taking up that mantle as well and look at where they too can make that change, and start to create that opportunities and fairness within our society for everyone, really. And for areas that you don't understand, educate. There's films, there's books, read, learn about other communities, engage with people that aren't from your immediate world, learn about them, go outside, explore. It's all there in terms of getting access and learning. Do some voluntary work in communities that you probably don't ever get involved in. Find out about them, understand about their challenges. That makes you much more in tune with the challenge, that as opposed to kind of saying, well, I think it's this, or I assume it's that. Do the work, invest in getting to know more, be inquisitive, be curious as an individual. And I think the more of us that can do that, the more we become a better society, and the more that we learn to appreciate our differences.
I've absolutely no doubt that you'll carry on being a campaigner. You're very good at it. Completely inspirational. I've been spellbound. It's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Graham.
You've made a great case. I'm sure all the people listening have heard you, which is the most important thing. And the communication is really strong, and I believe we will play a big part. People like you, and I'm sure you'll encourage other people to become campaigners as well. All of us in our own small way, and that is really, really positive.
And just to extend, if anybody's got any questions or they want to find out a little bit more around DNA, or you just want to know what you can do within your organizations, please feel free. I'm more than happy to give tips and advice and just point you in the right direction. But I think all of us have a part to play. So don't be afraid to reach out and just ask the question. If you don't know, ask. There's people out there that are happy to support, so I'm putting myself forward and saying, if anybody's got questions and they want to just ask, what should I be doing? How can I make this better? Reach out, and more than happy to help and give answers or point you where you can find those answers.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Cynthia. Thank you so much. As I say, positively inspirational. And we've got Erica's back on next week, and she's got a guest, Aliyah Abadorin, I believe it is, which is something about don't bloody waste. That's all I've written down. Honestly, that is the title. That is the title. It's something along those lines. Once again, Cynthia, thank you so much. It was
it's been a pleasure.
Really enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you on a stage or on a screen somewhere soon.
Being the drum as always for change.
Indeed, and to the audience, thanks again for
thank you, everyone. That was amazing. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.